Hi everyone, it's really good to have you here. Today we're going to explore something dark, strange, and deeply fascinating: the hidden world of mystical orders, secret brotherhoods, and occult societies that helped shape one of the most terrifying regimes in modern history, the Nazi regime in Germany. This isn't just a story about politics or war. It's a story about symbols, secret teachings, underground groups, and mystical beliefs that influenced some of the most powerful men behind the Third Reich. Before we dive into it, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments below. It's always amazing to see where this journey is reaching people. Now, let's step quietly into the shadows of a forgotten world. Long before Adolf Hitler rose to power, long before the swastika flew over Europe, there were whispers in Germany. Whispers of ancient knowledge, forgotten races, and secret wisdom that could unlock the future. These ideas didn't start with politics. They started with dreams of lost civilizations, with legends passed down through strange books and secret societies that met in dark rooms lit by candlelight. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, Germany was a hotbed for this kind of thought. There was a hunger for something older than science, something purer than modern life. Many people believed that the modern world had become too rational, too cold, and too disconnected from the spiritual truths of the past. One of the most influential groups of this era was called the Thule Society. It began in Munich shortly after World War I. To the outside world, it looked like a nationalist group focused on German pride and history, but inside, it was something much stranger. The Thule Society believed in ancient, mystical roots for the German people. They believed that the Aryan race, which they saw as the purest bloodline, had come from a lost civilization in the far north, maybe from Atlantis, maybe from a place called Hyperborea. This wasn't just politics, it was mythology, wrapped in the clothing of ideology. They believed the Aryans had secret powers, that their ancient wisdom had been buried or stolen, and that it could be recovered by those who were worthy. Members of the Thule Society weren't just scholars or politicians. They were magicians, astrologers, rune experts, and occultists. They held seances. They studied ancient runes not just as letters, but as symbols of magical power. They believed symbols could shape the mind and reality itself. The swastika, which would later become infamous under the Nazis, was one of these symbols. To the Thule members, it was an ancient sun symbol, a sign of power, purity, and rebirth. They used it long before Hitler adopted it for the Nazi flag. The Thule Society had a secret inner circle. Its members had to prove themselves not just by loyalty, but by belief. They swore oaths, they performed rituals, they believed they were the chosen few who could awaken the lost greatness of the Aryan people. They hated democracy. They hated Jews, Freemasons, and anyone they saw as an enemy of their vision. This hatred wasn't just political, it was mystical. They believed that their enemies were part of a dark force trying to block the rise of their pure, sacred order. One of the most dangerous things about the Thule Society was its connection to violence. In 1919, they helped form the German Workers' Party, which would later become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. One of the early members of this group was a strange, intense man named Adolf Hitler. He wasn't a founding member of the Thule Society, but he moved in the same circles. Some of his early supporters were deeply involved in it. They saw Hitler as a tool, or maybe even a messianic figure who could turn their dream into reality. Another strange group from this time was the Vril Society. It's not as well known, and some people even doubt it ever formally existed, but its ideas were powerful and spread through underground writings. The Vril Society believed in a hidden energy called Vril. They claimed this energy was used by a super race of beings who lived beneath the Earth's surface, possibly linked to Atlantis or ancient Tibet. They believed that contact with these beings could give humans great power, and that Vril could be harnessed for flight, healing, even telepathy. They were obsessed with ancient texts, strange machines, and the idea of connecting with other worlds. Some versions of the story say the Vril Society was led by women, mediums with long hair who claimed to receive messages from other planets. These women believed they were in contact with Aryan ancestors from Aldebaran, a distant star. Whether or not the group existed in the way some sources describe, the important thing is that these ideas circulated in Nazi Germany. They were taken seriously by people in power. The lines between science fiction, myth, and political ideology became blurred. One of the key figures connecting all of this to the heart of the Nazi regime was Heinrich Himmler. He was the head of the SS, the most feared and powerful branch of the Nazi machine. But Himmler wasn't just a bureaucrat or a general. He was a true believer in the occult. He believed in reincarnation. He believed that ancient Germanic gods were real. He saw the SS not just as a military force, but as a kind of knightly order, a mystical brotherhood that would rule the future. Himmler created a secret SS castle called Wewelsburg, deep in the German countryside. It was remodeled to resemble a fortress from a dark fairy tale. The floor of the main hall had a strange black sun symbol. The castle was filled with runes, hidden chambers, and secret rooms. Himmler imagined it as the spiritual center of the Nazi Empire. He held private rituals there. He believed the SS could tap into ancient powers and become the guardians of a new world order. Himmler even sent teams around the world to find sacred objects. He sent expeditions to Tibet looking for evidence of a lost Aryan race. He studied old texts and legends, hoping to find relics like the Holy Grail or the Spear of Destiny, the spear that was said to have pierced the side of Christ. He believed these objects held real power, not symbolic power, but actual magic. He thought that whoever held them could control the world. The Nazis weren't the first to chase these objects. For centuries, secret societies like the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, and the Freemasons had whispered about the same artifacts. But the Nazis brought a level of violence, control, and obsession that made their search far more dangerous. They weren't just seeking truth. They were trying to shape reality to match their myth. Inside the SS, there were secret lodges. Officers were chosen based not just on their loyalty, but on their ancestry. Himmler wanted to breed a new caste of warrior priests. He banned Christianity among his inner circle, calling it a foreign religion. Instead, he revived old pagan rituals, celebrated the solstices, and encouraged his men to marry in ceremonies that looked more like something from the Viking Age than the 20th century. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, there were darker beliefs. Some groups inside the regime were interested in necromancy, astrology, and even summoning spirits. They believed that the dead could guide the living, and that fallen warriors could lend their strength to the cause. Strange books filled with coded writing were passed among elite circles. Secret libraries held forbidden knowledge. These weren't just stories. Many of these writings were found after the war. Notes, journals, plans, and records showing just how seriously these men took their beliefs. As the war grew more desperate, so did their rituals. There are reports of blood sacrifices, of final ceremonies performed as the Allies closed in. Some claimed that Himmler believed he could make a deal with death itself. In the final days of the Third Reich, as burning, some of these secret societies vanished. Their members disappeared. Their records were burned or hidden. Some believe that fragments of these orders survived in South America or went underground in Europe. After the war, the Allies uncovered parts of this story. They found strange artifacts, recovered strange documents, and questioned survivors who spoke in whispers about secret groups within the Nazi elite. But much was never found. Some of the knowledge died with those who believed it, and some may still be waiting in hidden vaults, untouched, unread, and dangerous. There is little doubt that this was a great deal. After the collapse of the Nazi regime in 1945, Allied forces began a massive operation known as the denazification process. They wanted to dismantle every part of the Nazi system, military, political, cultural. But as they dug deeper, they began finding things that didn't fit the normal structure of a military dictatorship. In castles, bunkers, and symbols that hinted at something much older and stranger than simple fascism. They found maps of Atlantis, books on astrology, and texts on runic magic. They found photographs of rituals, handwritten oaths, and floor plans of sacred sites. Some of the American soldiers joked that they'd stumbled into a fantasy novel, but others understood what they were looking at. This wasn't fiction. It was the invisible spiritual core of the Nazi regime, something that had never been officially announced but quietly guided its inner circle. One of the most mysterious discoveries was made at Wewelsburg Castle. Inside the central chamber, the Allies found a floor marked with 12 dark rays spreading from a central circle, a symbol known now as the Black Sun. It wasn't an ancient symbol in the traditional sense. It had been invented by the Nazis, or at least modified from older designs. But it represented a very real belief that the SS was creating a new religion, one based not on God or reason, but on blood, soil, and power. Wewelsburg was built to be its temple, and the SS officers were its high priests. The 12 rays of the Black Sun were said to represent a secret hierarchy, 12 chosen men who would lead the future Reich in a world reshaped by Aryan values. Some say these men believed they were reincarnations of ancient Germanic heroes, guided by unseen forces. Others say they practiced meditations, rituals, and even psychic experiments in the castle's lower chambers. These stories may sound unbelievable, but they were taken seriously by Himmler and his inner circle. The deeper the Allies looked, the more they realized that parts of the Nazi leadership had been heavily influenced by older secret traditions. They began tracing connections back through German history, and they found a strange web of ideas that had been growing for decades. One of the key figures in this web was a man named Guido von List. He lived before the Nazis, but his writings helped lay the foundation for what came later. Von List believed that ancient runes held magical powers and that the German people were the descendants of a noble, mystical race. He created a system of beliefs called Aryan, wisdom of the Aryans. He saw the world as a battleground between the pure and the impure, the enlightened and the corrupted. His ideas were picked up by secret lodges, by mystical circles, and eventually by the early ideologues who would shape Nazi thought. Another early thinker was Georg Glanz von Liebenfels, a former monk who published a strange magazine called Ostara. In it, he wrote about a coming war between races, about the need to purify humanity, and about ancient supermen who had once ruled the earth. He claimed to have access to secret knowledge passed down through hidden orders. Hitler himself is said to have read Ostara as a young man in Vienna, long before he entered politics. But not all the influences on Nazi occultism came from within Germany. Some of the most important ideas came from outside, especially from the East. In the early 20th century, there was a fascination in Europe with Tibet, India, and the ancient East. Many believed that the wisdom of the world had flowed from there long ago. The Nazis sent expeditions to Tibet in the late 1930s, searching for evidence of ancient Aryans. They studied the swastika as it appeared in Hindu and Buddhist art, believing it proved their theory that the Aryans had once ruled much of the world before falling into decline. They weren't just interested in race or archaeology, they were searching for power. Spiritual power, technological power, supernatural power. Some Nazi scientists, inspired by these beliefs, began working on strange experiments. There were secret projects involving anti-gravity, invisible energy fields, and machines that were said to run on Vril. Some of these projects, like the infamous Die Glocke, or the bell, remain mysterious to this day. Described in later documents and testimonies, Die Glocke was said to be a large, bell-shaped device that emitted strange radiation and could bend gravity. Some believe it was part of an attempt to build a time machine or a gateway to another dimension. Whether any of these stories are true remains debated, but what is clear is that the Nazi leadership was willing to invest in projects that had no clear scientific basis, only mystical or esoteric origins. The secrecy surrounding these programs was absolute. Scientists worked in remote locations, guards swore oaths, papers were destroyed or buried, and as the war ended, many of these individuals disappeared. Some were captured by the Allies and brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. Officially, these scientists were valued for their knowledge in rocketry and weapons, but quietly, some researchers believe that the Americans also took an interest in the occult knowledge the Nazis had gathered. Rumors spread about classified programs within the U.S. military studying ancient symbols, psychic phenomena, and unconventional energy sources. At the same time, secret societies that had been banned or destroyed by the Nazis began to re-emerge. During the Nazi years, groups like the Freemasons were outlawed. Many of their members were arrested, tortured, or killed. The Nazis believed the Freemasons were part of a vast conspiracy, a Jewish Masonic alliance that was plotting against the Aryan race. This belief came from older sources, including the infamous hoax known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was a false document, but the Nazis treated it as truth. They accused the Freemasons of hiding behind symbols and rituals to manipulate world politics. But the Freemasons had their own secrets. Long before the Nazis, Masonic lodges had been centers of revolutionary thinking, mystical study, and secret brotherhood. Some lodges in Germany and Austria practiced rites that were deeply esoteric, involving alchemical symbolism, sacred geometry, and ancient myth. The Nazis feared these ideas not because they were dangerous in a practical sense, but because they offered a competing vision of reality. In a world where symbols hold power, every system of belief becomes a weapon. Other groups, like the Rosicrucians, also came under attack. The Rosicrucians believed in a secret spiritual wisdom passed down through the ages. Their teachings included healing, inner transformation, and contact with higher beings. The Nazis saw them as heretics, dangerous to the purity of their myth. Books were burned, temples were closed, but the ideas survived underground. Perhaps the most tragic example of this conflict was the fate of Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy. Steiner believed in a spiritual science, in reincarnation, karma, and the evolution of human consciousness. His ideas were peaceful, but they challenged Nazi ideology. His schools were shut down, his followers were persecuted, and yet his teachings survived, quietly resisting the darkness that was spreading across Europe. All through this time, symbols continued to carry enormous weight. The Nazis didn't choose their symbols randomly. Every color, every shape, every pattern had meaning. The black uniforms of the SS, the red banners, the use of the eagle and the swastika, these weren't just visual choices. They were part of a carefully constructed ritual. The rallies at Nuremberg, the torch-lit marches, the use of music and chants, these were modern versions of ancient ceremony. They were designed to create a feeling of awe, submission, and sacred destiny. Even the structure of the Nazi government echoed old mystical hierarchies. At the top stood the Führer, a word that means leader but also carries echoes of messianic promise. Below him were layers of loyal officers, bound not just by law but by secret oaths and personal loyalty. The SS had its own initiation rites. Members had to prove their ancestry, swear lifelong loyalty, and participate in rituals that resembled the practices of ancient warrior cults. But always beneath the surface were the myths. Myths of blood and soil, myths of rebirth, myths of a coming golden age. These weren't just stories, they were tools. They gave the regime meaning. They helped justify the horrors that followed, because once you believe that history is a sacred struggle between light and darkness, you can justify almost anything. After the war, as the world tried to make sense of the unimaginable destruction left behind, a strange silence fell over the more occult aspects of the Nazi regime. Governments focused on rebuilding, on justice, on trials and treaties. But the threads of secret knowledge, forbidden rituals, and mystical orders didn't disappear. They simply went underground again, as they had so many times before in history. Some of the men who had been involved in the SS's secret programs were never caught. Some were absorbed into new governments, intelligence services, or private networks. Some took what they knew and began building new circles of influence in new countries under new names. One of the most mysterious trails leads to South America. After the fall of Berlin, many high-ranking Nazis fled to Argentina, Chile, and Brazil. It's well documented that men like Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele escaped justice by hiding in these countries. But along with them, it's believed that parts of the SS occult network may have survived as well. In the mountains and jungles of South America, strange compounds and secretive communities began to appear. Places like Colonia Dignidad in Chile, founded by a former Nazi, became centers of extreme secrecy. Survivors and investigators reported strange ceremonies, underground tunnels, and a strict internal hierarchy that echoed the rituals of the SS. Some researchers believe that the mystical ideas behind Nazi occultism were never fully abandoned, but were preserved, changed, and passed down in hidden networks. These included neo-pagan groups, far-right esoteric circles, and radical nationalist movements that continued to study ancient symbols, racial mythology, and secret teachings. Some of these groups claimed to be the spiritual heirs of the Thule Society or the Vril Order. They used coded language, revived old runes, and shared forbidden books among trusted members. One book that continued to circulate in these circles was The Coming Race by Edward Bulwer Lytton, the 19th century novel that first introduced the concept of Vril. Though it was written as fiction, the book was taken seriously by many later occultists. It described a powerful underground race that used a mysterious energy called Vril, which gave them the ability to move objects with their minds, heal the sick, and control nature. The idea that a hidden source of power could be discovered and used by a chosen elite resonated deeply with those seeking to rebuild an invisible empire of knowledge and influence. Other books used by post-war secret circles included ancient grimoires, the Armanen runes system developed by Guido von List, and various works on alchemy, astrology, and Eastern mysticism. These texts were not always easy to find. They were passed through private libraries, secret publishers, and occult bookstores in cities like Vienna, Zurich, and Buenos Aires. Some were coded, some used old German dialects or symbolic writing. They weren't just studied, they were believed. Over time, these ideas found new homes, not only in underground lodges, but also in parts of the New Age movement, in certain radical spiritual sects, and in isolated rural communities. In some cases, the symbols of Nazi mysticism were stripped of their political context and reimagined as tools of personal transformation. In others, they were used to quietly preserve a dangerous worldview, hidden behind layers of ritual and secrecy. Meanwhile, in Europe and the United States, intelligence agencies began to take an interest in the power of belief itself. In the early days of the Cold War, as the West competed with the Soviet Union for global dominance, a new kind of research began to emerge. It focused on psychological warfare, mass influence, and the role of symbolism, ritual, and myth in controlling people's minds. Some of these ideas came from scientific sources like behavioral psychology, but others drew quietly from the work the Nazis had done on mass rallies, propaganda, symbolism, and emotional control. A small number of researchers even looked into the occult directly. They studied the ways in which ancient rites and secret societies could shape the thoughts and emotions of groups. Projects were launched to explore psychic phenomena, remote viewing, and altered states of consciousness. Though these efforts were usually kept secret or denied publicly, fragments of them would later surface in strange places, from classified CIA files to underground spiritual community. The thread of mystical fascism continued to run quietly through the second half of the 20th century. In the 1970s and 1980s, far-right occult groups began to reappear in Europe. They combined nationalism with esotericism, drawing on the same myths that had inspired the Nazis decades before. Some worshipped Wotan, the ancient Germanic god of war and wisdom. Others followed modern versions of Aryasophy, believing that the spiritual strength of a race was more important than its physical survival. Symbols like the black sun returned, now hidden in tattoos, pendants, and coded artwork. Runes were used not just for decoration, but as magical tools in rituals meant to connect practitioners with the forces of the ancient world. Some of these groups operated in the open, disguised as cultural organizations. Others were fully underground, inviting only those who passed secret tests or initiations. They used many of the same recruitment methods as older secret societies. They appealed to the alienated, the curious, the ones searching for meaning. They promised hidden knowledge, a sense of belonging, a role in something greater. Often, initiates were told that the truth could only be understood step by step. First, they were introduced to ancient myths, then to forgotten symbols, later to racial theories and ideas of destiny. By the time the final teachings were revealed, the person was already deeply involved, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. Inside these groups, rituals were performed in forests, in basements, in abandoned castles. They used chants, candles, and invocations. They celebrated the solstices and equinoxes. They believed that by following the old paths, they could awaken powers sleeping in the earth and in themselves. And not all of this remained separate from politics. In some cases, members of these mystical orders ran for office, joined nationalist parties, or supported underground movements. They saw politics not as a career, but as a battlefield for the soul of the world. Their goal was not just power, but transformation, a new age ruled by those who had unlocked the secrets of the past. But even as these groups continued to operate in the shadows, researchers and historians were slowly uncovering the real story behind the Nazi regime's obsession with the occult. New documents were found, survivors came forward, and bit by bit, the hidden world beneath the swastika began to emerge. It became clear that the Nazi leadership had not just used the occult for manipulation, they had believed it. The ideas of ancient power, secret energy, magical destiny, they were not just decorations for the regime, they were part of its heart. The Third Reich was not just a political system, it was, for its inner circle, a spiritual movement, a dark religion cloaked in steel and fire. This made it more dangerous than anyone had realized, because when a movement is guided by myth, it cannot be reasoned with. When it believes itself to be chosen, it does not compromise. And when it sees the world as a battlefield between sacred light and impure darkness, it will destroy anything that stands in its way. Even today, echoes of these beliefs remain. Symbols once used by the SS can still be found in certain fringe groups. Phrases from Nazi rituals are sometimes whispered in neo-pagan ceremonies. And the dream of a secret mystical brotherhood that will one day rise again continues to haunt the dark corners of our world. Understanding this hidden side of the Nazi regime is not just about history. It's about recognizing the power of belief. It's about seeing how myth can be twisted into weapon, how symbols can become chains, and how secret orders, when combined with hate, can lead to disaster. But it's also a reminder that secrecy, when used to hide truth, is dangerous, that hidden knowledge, when placed in the wrong hands, can destroy entire nations, and that the line between mysticism and madness is often thinner than we think.